Iran's new president, Ebrahim Raisi, took the oath of office today. Raisi is a protege of the Ayatollah Khamenei. With Raisi in power, every branch of government is now controlled by anti-Western hardliners who are loyal to the supreme leader. How will this make life better for the Iranian people? Well, they are hoping for an economic miracle after years of crippling sanctions. Raisi has promised to get those sanctions lifted, which would be miraculous itself. The U.S. slapped sanctions on him years ago over alleged human rights abuses. Tonight, Iran has a new president, a hardliner, and he has a history. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
I think that decisiveness is very important in the face of enemies, which I think Raisi definitely has.
I doubt Mr. Raisi can do anything about our problems that were caused by sanctions and economic pressure.
The first thing I want from them is to relieve this economic pressure. Life has become very difficult.
Also coming up, the perversion of the pandemic. Some parts of the world still have no coronavirus vaccines, and people are dying. In other parts of the world with vaccines, some people are rejecting them, and some of them are dying too.
I hate to hear, lost a couple acquaintances the past 24 to 36 hours. COVID, this Delta strain, something else.
To our viewers on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with the hard truth facing the new hardliner president of Iran. Today in Tehran, Ebrahim Raisi took the oath of office as president of the Islamic Republic. He is fiercely loyal to the supreme leader, and his rise to power closes the circle of ultra-conservatives in all branches of the government. Raisi does not take office with a strong mandate from the Iranian people. Voter turnout in the election was the lowest in history, in no small part because almost all of the others who would have been candidates were not allowed to run. Raisi has the backing of the one man above him, the supreme leader. His challenge now, how to keep the people from turning their backs on him. An economy crippled by U.S. sanctions. Now, Raisi is promising to bring that to an end, knowing that it is key to preventing voter apathy from boiling over into social unrest. And all of this tied to the nuclear deal between Tehran and world powers. President Biden of the U.S. wants to revive the deal. President Raisi says he does too, and yet the divide is as wide and as deep as ever.
Ebrahim Raisi, the second most powerful man in Iran. Only the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, seen here with Raisi at the first inaugural event on Tuesday, holds more power. 60-year-old Raisi holds deeply conservative views which may shape Iran's political landscape. Born into a strictly religious family, he has extensive theological training and holds a high-ranking position in Iran's religious hierarchy. Raisi has had a long career as a prosecutor. According to Amnesty International in 2018, Raisi was involved in extrajudicial executions as a member of the so-called Death Commission in the late 1980s. Thousands of regime opponents were executed. In 2019, Raisi rose the ranks to become head of Iran's judiciary. That same year, he was sanctioned by the United States for human rights violations. Now as president, Raisi may further restrict Iran's already limited freedom of expression. On the economic front, he faces the tough task of improving Iran's dire financial situation, badly affected by the pandemic. This has led to deep levels of discontent and resulted in low turnout during the presidential election. A key element for improving the country's fortunes is an easing of US sanctions. Raisi has vowed to work towards reviving the 2015 nuclear deal, but only if Iran sets the conditions. Raisi is also expected to take a tough stance with Israel. The new president enjoys the backing of Iran's supreme leader, who has described him as a trustworthy and experienced man. An endorsement that could one day result in Ebrahim Raisi becoming the next supreme leader.
Well, my first guest tonight says Raisi's rise to power was the result more of a selection rather than an election. Ali Fatullah Nejad has spent many years studying Iran's evolution in the multipolar world of today. His new book, entitled Iran in an Emerging New World Order, From Ahmadinejad to Rouhani, looks at Iranian foreign policy in the 21st century. Ali, it's good to have you on the program. President Raisi does not have a strong mandate from the people. But I'm wondering, does that really matter?
Well, it depends if it matters for whom, but the very reason that he was he could easily win the election back in June was not only because of the Guardian Council's disqualification, but because of widespread disillusion among Iranians vis-a-vis all factions of the elite, including the moderates, including the reformists. Their candidate had only obtained just a few percentage points. So this is important to remember. And after all, it was a selection, as you suggested, by the supreme leader of Iran, who wanted him to become the next president.
And we're seeing here what looks like the ultra-conservatives consolidating power now in all branches of government, answering only to one, that is the supreme leader, while on the streets, people are demanding more accountability from those in power. Is this a recipe for social and political dynamite?
Well, absolutely, it is. Basically what we've seen also during the past few years, and what we've seen, especially during the last few weeks, are much darker clouds over the entire establishment of the Islamic Republic as pressure from below is growing. We've seen a wave of unprecedented strikes in the petrochemical and oil industry by contract workers. And we've seen also protests in the oil-rich province of Khuzestan that were kicked off by a water shortage, but that have multiple reasons, and which spread to different parts of the country and a lot of solidarity rallies in major cities. So there is deep-seated disillusionment vis-a-vis the entire establishment, and those clouds were already gathering during the Rouhani administration, where we saw the most radical uprisings against the regime probably in the history of the Islamic Republic, starting in December 2017. So what we're going to see is much more continuity than change. Although you're right in pointing out that he's a hardliner, also President Rouhani was, very close to the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, and he was his representative in the Supreme National Security Council for 2 decades before assuming the presidency. So both in domestic politics, but also in foreign policy, we're going to see much more continuity than change. Also, the repression was very harsh during Rouhani, so this is going to continue.
Let me ask you about the U.S. sanctions. We know that they're tied to reviving the Iran nuclear deal. Both the U.S. president and now the new Iranian president, both of them say that they want to resume talks. How does an ultra-conservative cleric in Iran, who's now become president, how does he achieve a meeting of the minds with the Biden White House?
Well, he doesn't need to do that because the presidency as well as the foreign ministry do not play the primary role in strategic decisions of the Islamic Republic, be it in domestic politics, but also foreign policy. So the main decision maker is going to be the same, which is the supreme leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And also Raisi pledged that, as you said, that he wants to return to the nuclear deal because, after all, the entire establishment in the Islamic Republic needs to get rid of those sanctions that have been destabilizing and really decimating the income of the establishment as well. And of course, many of those sanctions costs have been externalized onto the civilian population, both materially and discursively. But also the establishment is very much suffering. So, I mean, Raisi is not going to play a role there. The nuclear dossier gonna be transferred from the Foreign Ministry to the Supreme National Security Council, which is the main elite body to decide on national and foreign policy. So. We cannot expect much change in terms of Iranian strategies, except for the fact that we're gonna see much more harsher rhetoric coming out of Tehran.
How Machiavellic is Raisi? I mean, as you say, he's a protege of the supreme leader. This protege could possibly become the next supreme leader. How will this factor into Raisi's presidency?
Well, it can be a so-called internship for his, supreme leadership, but this is, premature to say. But of course, he's very much to the supreme leader. He's someone that is very loyalist and very pliant to the top echelons of the Islamic Republic from day one, when he was part of the death committee that was established by revolutionary leader Khomeini back then, up until most recently, when he was assuming chief positions in the Islamic Republic, endorsed by Supreme Leader Khamenei, be it Chief Justice, but also be it the chairman of probably the most powerful so-called religious foundation in Iran, which is basically a huge economic empire. So he is well placed, he has been well placed. But as I said at the beginning, he's known to be someone who is pliant. So we cannot expect, I think, a lot of initiatives, initiatives coming from himself.
Ali Fatollah-Nejad, it's good talking with you. We appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I feel myself really good because I have support from the whole world, and this support makes me much stronger. And I'm here in Poland, and I feel myself like in safety, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, that was Kristina Timanovskaya, the Belarusian sprinter who's been at the center of a diplomatic storm at the Olympics in Tokyo. Her odyssey began on Sunday when Belarusian officials tried to force her to return home after she publicly criticized her coaches. After taking shelter in the Polish embassy in Tokyo, Poland granted her a humanitarian visa and safe passage back to Europe. Timanovskaya landed in Warsaw on Wednesday. She says she fears retribution if she returns to Belarus. Well, it's been a year since longtime Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko faced what became the biggest challenge yet to his grip on power. Last August, protesters hungry for an end to his authoritarian rule took to the streets after the country's contested presidential election, and for a few short months allowed themselves to imagine that democracy would prevail. But the familiar system of repression, it quickly cranked into action. It targets not just opposition leaders and independent journalists, but increasingly ordinary Belarusians as well. And as the regime in Minsk wages war on any last trace of opposition symbols, the charges used to arrest people are becoming ever more absurd.
If they're not in exile, they're here behind bars. Belarus's opposition leaders facing the brunt of Alexander Lukashenko's crackdown. Presidential candidate Viktor Babariko got 14 years in jail for alleged corruption. He was the first to be sentenced. Sergei Tsikhanovsky, husband of high-profile opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Maria Kolesnikova, now face 15 and 12 years respectively on charges of inciting riots and conspiracy to seize power. And chances are they'll be convicted. Belarusian courts have yet to acquit a single political defendant over the past year. But it's not just opposition leaders feeling the heat from Lukashenko's security services. Since last year's rigged presidential election triggered mass protests, Belarusian authorities have made tens of thousands of arrests, many long after the events in question. Dancing on the streets of Brest back in September 2020, Belarusian authorities call it disturbing the peace and a hindrance to transport. Most protesters weren't even stopped by police at the time, but in the months since, dozens of them have been sentenced to prison and house arrest terms between 1 and 2 years, as the authorities work their way through the footage, little by little, identifying participants. But you don't need to have been out protesting to have a good reason to be fearful for your freedom in Belarus these days. The opposition movement's white and red colours, once all over Minsk, are a particular target for authorities. These red and white tracksuit bottoms landed their owner in jail overnight and liable for a €200 fine. A woman in the capital Minsk was even unluckier. Walking around in white and red socks was found to constitute an illegal one-woman demonstration, enough to see her spend 2 weeks in jail. Sometimes, though, the search for opposition symbols leads up unexpected avenues, as the resident of this apartment complex found when the red and white packaging of a new television on a balcony raised suspicions. He, too, spent 2 weeks in prison. Some Belarusians have now taken to putting out blank sheets of paper in their windows, something that also now constitutes an illegal demonstration, as one Minsk resident discovered when he was sentenced to 25 days behind bars. But as much as this absurd game of cat and mouse provides opposition-minded Belarusians with some occasional light relief, the intention is chillingly clear: to erase every last visual reminder of last year's challenge to Lukashenko's rule, and to up the price of dissent for ordinary Belarusians and their families. With a conviction behind them, these people's life choices will be limited for years to come. The regime's prisons may be big enough for the country's activists and independent journalists, but they certainly aren't big enough to lock up tens of thousands of ordinary people who took part in politics for the first time last summer. This is all about making sure that doesn't happen again.
This week, the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus worldwide hit 200 million. It's a staggering figure, underscoring the global impact of this virus. But while wealthy countries have been able to protect many of their citizens with vaccines, poorer nations continue to lack access to life-saving shots. The World Health Organization is calling for rich nations to delay rolling out booster shots until at least 10% of the global population is vaccinated.
What we're calling for is, for at least the next 2 months, is a complete, global solidarity around the goal of catching up the rest of the world to, in terms of its immunization coverage. We're in a pandemic. The entire world is in the middle of this, and as we've seen from the emergence of variant after variant, we cannot get out of it unless the whole world gets out of it together.
It's no understatement to say that the course of the pandemic depends on the leadership of the G20 countries. We need everyone's cooperation, especially the handful of countries and companies that control the global supply of vaccines.
But tonight, there are no signs that wealthy countries plan to heed the call of the WHO. Now, this is important because poorer nations, more than a year and a half into this pandemic, still do not have access to those life-saving vaccines. Now, those countries awash in vaccines, they are contending with another problem: vaccine hesitancy. In the United States, as the highly infectious Delta variant spreads, hospital COVID units are filling up with patients. Almost all of them are unvaccinated. Some of them are making appeals from their hospital beds, like Travis Campbell from Virginia.
This place was basically empty with COVID last week, but now it's full. So it is growing, and it is getting stronger. Hate to hear, lost a couple acquaintances the past 24 to 36 hours. COVID, this Delta strain, that's something else. I would ask you, if you thought that you had to sit down and plan your goodbyes and funeral, or go get the COVID vaccine, what would you do? I'd hope to God that all my friends a family would not say, somebody hand me a piece of paper and a pen. That's a sobering thought, of which I have done. I have planned.
Yeah, it is not easy watching that, but we thought it was important to share with our viewers. My next guest tonight is an expert on the nexus of public health, infectious diseases, and humanitarian aid. Dr. Niels Henning from the Mount Sinai Global Health Center joins me now. Dr. Henning, it's good to have you on the program. Before we talk about the vaccines and vaccine equality, I just want to get your reaction to what we just showed there. This patient in the United States admitting that he could have prevented being there.
I think my first reaction as a physician is that sick people should really concentrate on getting better, or not on putting messages out while they are sick. On the other hand, I think it is important that people who are not vaccinated are confronted with the realities, and I think there is a role to play for community leaders and others to reach out to convey that message.
Do you think that these stories of people regretting not getting vaccinated, do you think it will persuade people who are hesitant now to get the shot?
I think it might persuade one. I mean, obviously, it is an issue of trust. And in the end, it is important. I think developing trust is probably more important than scare people. So I think the message should kind of concentrate on really about the importance of the vaccine, what the vaccine is doing, how the vaccines were developed, that the vaccines are safe, and does it really protect you, and that it also protects others. I think those are the messages that we should concentrate on. But obviously, a personal statement, and that's one of a very powerful statement we just heard before. They are also very important, and I think they also play an important role.
What do you make of these vaccine mandates that we're seeing now being introduced in the United States? We know lots of companies are requiring people to be vaccinated, and New York City has become the first major urban area that's going to require people to prove that they've been vaccinated if they want to go inside restaurants and bars or gyms. What do you make of that? Could it backfire?
I mean, yes. I mean, as here in New York, as you said, and even here at Mount Sinai, where I work for our students, we also mandate them to be vaccinated. No, I think it is a very good idea. I think it does make a lot of sense. I think like in restaurants, in bars and clubs and venues, it protects the people who work there. It also protects the other audience members, and also it kind of protects their extended networks. It protects everyone, you know, like when those people go home, they might have small kids at home who might not be able to get vaccinated yet. So it protects the whole community. So I think it's a very good idea.
And do you think that the public information campaign about these breakthrough infections, is it helping or hurting the vaccination drives?
Well, I think it is important that the information is brought over the right way. I mean, there are breakthrough infections, but the people, they get infected, but there's a difference of being infected and being severely sick and being admitted to the ICU. At our hospital, the patients that we see are admitted to the ICU. They're all people who got not vaccinated. And yes, we do test people positive who are vaccinated, but they are not severely sick. So I think that is really, that's a really important message.
And this Delta variant that we're dealing with right now, particularly in the United States, what does it mean for this goal of 80 or 90% in reaching herd immunity? Does it just shatter that equation?
I don't think, in my opinion, like the ideal of herd immunity was never that achievable. I mean, as you showed forward, I mean, here in the developed countries, about 100, there are about 100 doses per 100 people giving right now. I think right now we have 70% are covered of the ones who are eligible, but in other parts of the world, they have given 1.5 doses per 100 population. And as long as the majority of the world is poorly populated, there will be nothing even close to herd immunity, and this will. And I think for years there will be no herd immunity. So in the end, for the next months or even years, people who are not vaccinated, eventually they will become infected.
Dr. Niels Henning from Mount Sinai Global Health Center tonight. Dr. Henning, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the day is almost done. The conversation, it continues online. You'll find us on Twitter, either at DW News. You can follow me at Brent Goff TV. And remember, whatever happens between now and then, tomorrow is another day. We'll see you then.